Welcome, dear listeners of Golden Memories. Thank you for every like, comment, and warm word. They inspire us to create new heartfelt stories. Subscribe so you don't miss the next episodes, and enjoy listening.
My son-in-law Marcus declared, "You'll wait until we're all served." Something shattered inside me then. Not rage, not tears, just a quiet fracture like ice cracking on a winter pond. I stared at the prime rib I had spent 6 hours preparing, 2 hours marinating, 4 hours slow roasting to perfection. I looked at the dining room where everyone sat expectantly. Then I lifted the heavy platter, still steaming, and walked straight out the back door. Nobody followed. I didn't hear gasps or protests, just the gentle clink of silverware against china and children giggling, oblivious to the moment that had just shifted everything. The evening air bit at my cheeks, sharper than I'd anticipated. It helped clear my head. The platter burned through my oven mitts, the aluminum foil crinkling under my grip, but I didn't pause. I walked the 4 blocks to my cottage, cradling the roast like a rescued child, careful not to spill the precious juices pooling at the bottom. Inside, everything smelled like lavender soap and old books. My cottage hadn't truly felt like home since Margaret convinced me to move in with her family 18 months ago. "It makes sense, Mother," she'd insisted. "You won't struggle with utilities. We'll look after you properly." I should have recognized the trap. Nothing comes without strings in this world, not even your own dignity. I set the platter on my small counter. The silence embraced me like a familiar shawl. No television blaring, no voices demanding to know where the salt was or complaining about the vegetables being overcooked. Just me and the gentle ticking of the mantel clock I'd forgotten to wind in months. I prepared a plate for myself, one of the delicate china ones with tiny roses around the edge, slightly chipped near the handle. I carved a generous slice of beef, spooned the rich pan juices over it, and sat at my own table. I ate deliberately. The meat was perfectly tender. The herbs had penetrated beautifully. It might have been my finest roast ever. No one praised it. No one interrupted my meal. And for the first time in years, I savored every single bite. When I finished, I washed my dish, dried it carefully, and returned it to its place. Then I settled into the armchair by the bay window and watched the oak trees dancing in the evening breeze. I used to tend those flower beds every spring. Now Margaret insisted it was too risky. Said I might stumble and fracture something, but she never asked what I preferred. She simply decided. She's always decided. I recalled Margaret's voice, sharp as winter wind, saying, "You'll wait until we're all served." As if I were hired help, as if decades of raising her, feeding her, supporting her through her children's births meant nothing. She'd always possessed this talent for making commands sound like suggestions, even when issuing ultimatums. The truth is, I sensed this moment approaching. It just took that one sentence to crystallize everything. I remained by that window for hours. I thought about all the times I'd swallowed my words, all the times I'd convinced myself it wasn't worth the conflict. When she snapped at me in front of Marcus, when she rolled her eyes because I couldn't operate her complicated coffee machine, when she said, "Don't wear that sweater to dinner, it looks dated," when she suggested I should make arrangements like I was spoiled produce with an expiration date. I thought about my other daughter, Claire, lost 8 years now. She was the gentle soul, the one who brought me chamomile tea when my joints ached, the one who telephoned every Sunday just to chat, even when exhaustion weighed her down. She left me a granddaughter, though, Emma. Bright, perceptive Emma. She'd be mature enough now to see through the family's pretenses. I wondered what she would have thought if she'd witnessed my departure. And then I reflected on myself, on the young woman I once was, and the person I had become. I wasn't bitter, just weary. Weary of existing in someone else's space, weary of being addressed like a charitable obligation, weary of pretending that being useful was equivalent to being cherished. I rose, went to the kitchen drawer, and retrieved a pen and notepad. There were arrangements I needed to make, not just today, but immediately. My name remained on this cottage's deed. My accounts were still under my control. I still possessed agency. I had simply misplaced it. Outside, the sun sank low and streetlights began their nightly vigil. Somewhere, Margaret was probably discovering the missing roast. Perhaps someone was finally wondering about my whereabouts. Perhaps not. It no longer mattered. Tonight I would sleep in my own bed, eat my own cooking, and answer to nobody. And tomorrow I would begin making choices, not as someone's burden, but as myself. The telephone rang 3 times that evening, but I ignored it. I watched Margaret's name illuminate the screen and let it fade to black. She left no voicemail, just called as if the sound alone might summon me back. It couldn't. I slept more soundly than I had in months, the kind of rest that comes not from peace, but from a weight finally lifted. I woke with the sunrise as always, though there was no grandchild to dress, no breakfast to prepare for people who barely acknowledged my presence. I sat at the kitchen table with Earl Grey tea and a slice of the cold roast, now even more flavorful after resting overnight. I didn't reheat it. I didn't fuss. I simply ate it as it was, quietly, thoughtfully, while the cottage held its breath around me. By 9, I'd written a list. Review bank statements, contact the attorney, examine the papers Margaret had helped organize last autumn, make decisions. The list wasn't lengthy, but it was genuine, and it was mine. I retrieved the folder from the bookshelf, the one labeled Property and Finances, and spread it across the kitchen table. Inside were receipts from improvements I'd funded, utility bills somehow transferred to Margaret's name, notes from her about streamlining things, meaning gradually shifting control away from my hands. I remembered when she persuaded me to add her name to one savings account for emergencies only. I thought I was being prudent. That's their method, isn't it? They don't seize everything at once. They erode slowly until you can't recognize what used to belong to you. Next, I opened my laptop. The bank's website had been bookmarked, though I rarely accessed it anymore. I delegated that to Margaret too frequently, but not today. I reset my password, answered the security questions, thankfully still ones I had chosen, and there it was, my balance, still substantial, still mine. I made a note to visit the branch personally. I wanted human eyes to meet, not just computer screens. I wanted documents printed, authorization forms reviewed, no more joint access, no more convenience arrangements. Just me, my name, my signature. This wasn't revenge. This was clarity. I glanced up from my notes and noticed the photograph on the refrigerator, one of the few I hadn't packed away when I moved. Claire and I standing in the herb garden with Emma between us, perhaps 9 or 10, her hands full of mint she'd pulled straight from the planter. We were all laughing, not performing, not posing, just genuine. That laughter, I hadn't laughed like that in ages. I picked up the phone and dialed Emma's number from memory. It rang twice before she answered. Grandma Rose. Her voice warmed me like sunlight. Hello, darling. A pause. Are you all right? Mom mentioned something happened, but she was vague. She looked upset, though. I smiled. Something did happen. I remembered I'm still breathing. Emma was quiet for a moment, then released a soft laugh. Well, that's one way to put it. I left, I said simply. Last night I took the roast and I left. Another pause, but no judgment, just a slow exhale. Good, she said. Good for you. My throat tightened. Would you like to visit sometime? I'll cook lunch, nothing elaborate. Tomorrow, she said quickly. I mean, if that works. Tomorrow would be perfect. After we hung up, I walked through the cottage slowly. I hadn't really observed it in months. The curtains I'd sewn myself before Margaret was born, the ceramic lamp I refused to replace despite its chips, the bookshelf filled with paperbacks and nobody borrowed anymore. Everything had its place. Everything held meaning. I dusted, I polished, I opened windows. The cottage exhaled with me. At midday, I ventured to the backyard and stood beside the raised beds. The earth was dry but not hopeless. The rosemary was still thriving. A few determined nasturtiums nodded their orange heads. I touched the wooden frame and let my fingers rest there. Margaret had told me to abandon the garden. "It's too much for you, Mother. Just let it go." She didn't understand. You don't abandon the things that remind you who you are. You nurture them, even if your hands tremble, even if your knees protest, even if nobody notices. The phone remained silent that day, and that was perfectly fine. Claire used to tell me I was the most resilient woman she knew. She'd say it when I repaired the dishwasher myself, or when I held David's hand as he drew his final breath, or when I returned to work 5 days after his funeral, because bills don't pause for grief. Strange how that strength becomes invisible as you age. You stop being the woman who carried the family forward and become the woman people speak around, the one they pat condescendingly, the one they tell to rest, to sit quietly, to step aside. After David died, I didn't collapse. I cooked, cleaned, maintained the mortgage, worked double shifts. Margaret was 23, newly graduated, eager to establish independence. Claire, still in college, stayed close. She always kept one foot in reality, never too consumed with ambition to forget who raised her. Margaret had determination, certainly, but Claire had compassion. I remember the first weeks after his death, how Margaret kept insisting, "You need to accept help," when what she meant was, "You're not handling this the way I think you should." She moved out 6 weeks later, said the cottage felt suffocating, said she needed space. Claire remained. She contributed to expenses when possible, worked part-time between classes, made me laugh when the evenings grew too quiet. I used to find her on the porch talking to the stars like old friends. She was never eager to escape. Even after marriage, even after Emma's birth, she made time. That kind of love doesn't announce itself. It simply appears. And when the illness came, she faced it the same way she faced everything, gently, but with clear eyes. She called before every treatment, not because she needed guidance, but because she knew I needed to hear her voice. When she died, Margaret told me, "You have to stay strong now for Emma." But her tone held no tenderness. It felt more like an assignment than comfort. Emma was only 14. She moved in with Margaret because I was supposedly too old to raise a teenager. I wanted to protest, to insist I could still mother, even if my knees ached and my hands shook some mornings, but I didn't. I allowed it to happen, and perhaps that was my first real surrender, not to age, but to self-doubt. The following years blurred together in compromises. I sold my car. "You don't need it anymore, Mother," Margaret said. "We'll drive you wherever necessary." Except they rarely did. I stopped hosting holidays. "It's simpler at our place," she insisted. I stopped gardening. "Your back can't handle that." I stopped decorating for celebrations. "Let us manage it. You just relax." Each time I relinquished something, I told myself it was practical. But practicality cuts deeply. You only realize how deeply when you reach for something and discover it's no longer yours. Margaret isn't malicious, not in obvious ways. She doesn't shout. She doesn't strike. Her weapons are silence, suggestion, dismissal. She's mastered the art of minimizing. If I expressed hurt, she'd blink slowly and say, "Oh, I didn't intend it that way." As if my pain was inconvenient. As if my feelings were a misunderstanding. That's what made last night different. "You'll wait until we're all served," she said, not with malice, with efficiency, with coldness so practiced it masqueraded as logic. I wasn't part of the celebration. I was part of the service. And when I took the roast and left, she didn't stop me. Not even a whisper, just silence, which revealed everything. This morning after my tea, I opened another box I hadn't touched in years. Inside were Claire's letters, real letters, handwritten, sealed, mailed. She believed in paper. "Screens deceive," she used to say. "Ink tells truth." I read 3 of them. One described Emma's first dance recital, how nervous she'd been, how her hands trembled before the music began, and how she beamed afterward like she'd conquered the world. Another was simply a list of things Claire felt grateful for that week. The third was harder, written after a scan that showed the cancer had spread. "I'm not afraid of dying," she wrote. "I'm afraid of being forgotten." I folded the letter and held it close. "I haven't forgotten you, sweetheart," I whispered. "I never will." I spent the afternoon writing a new letter, this one to Emma. Not an apology, not a complaint, just a memory from when she was small and I taught her to make bread. Her tiny hands covered in flour, her face serious with concentration. I ended with, "You were always watching. I see that now. I just want you to know so was I." I sealed the envelope, wrote her name, and placed it by the door. Tomorrow I'd give it to her personally. There's a silence that comes not from peace, but from absence. That was the kind filling Margaret's house the morning after I left. I imagined it while I prepared my tea, how the children whispered over cereal, uncertain why grandmother's chair was empty, how Marcus glanced at Margaret waiting for explanation, and how she, with all her skill at deflection, probably said nothing at all. Silence is easier than admitting your mother walked out with the main course. I sat on my porch with tea wrapped in an old cardigan Claire had given me the Christmas before Emma was born. The sleeves were worn thin, one button hanging loose, but it still carried the faint scent of her favorite jasmine perfume. I watched a cardinal dart across the fence, then freeze mid-motion, sensing my observation. I smiled. I appreciated the company. Around 11, I heard Emma's voice before I saw her. "Grandma Rose." I stood too quickly and felt the familiar twinge in my left knee. "Back here, darling." She appeared around the corner carrying a white bakery box, hair pulled back, cheeks rosy. "I brought scones," she said, "from that little cafe near the library, the one you used to love." I nearly laughed. "Used to. I still do. Come inside." We sat at the kitchen table with warm cranberry scones between us. Emma poured tea like she'd observed me do it countless times. She probably had. She didn't ask questions immediately, and I didn't rush to explain. We simply ate slowly, like we had all the time in the world. I saw Mom's expression last night. She said finally, when she returned to the table, she looked stunned, like she didn't expect you to actually leave. I sipped my tea. Neither did I until I did. "I'm glad you did." She looked down. I wanted to say something, but it didn't feel like my place. "It wasn't," I said. "And yet, here you are." She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "She's not evil," Emma said quietly. "But she treats you like a favor she's doing for the world, like she expects applause for letting you exist in her house." I said nothing. "I know that sounds harsh," she added. "No," I said, "it sounds accurate." We sat in that understanding for a while. Then she pulled something from her bag, a set of house keys. "I made copies," she said. "For emergencies, sure, but also so I can visit whenever, if you want." I took the keys, felt their weight in my palm, 3 of them, one with a blue cover. "Do I get input on the keychain?" I teased. Emma grinned. "That's non-negotiable." We talked longer about school, about her job at the bookstore, about the neighbor's dog that kept escaping into her yard. She said its name was Buster, and it had strong opinions about squirrels. When she left, I stood on the porch until her car disappeared around the corner. Then I went back inside, sat at the table, and held the keys a little longer before placing them in the drawer where I kept a flashlight, spare batteries, and my old recipe cards. I thought I'd feel more isolated, but I didn't. I felt contained, like I had stepped back into a shape that had always been mine. The rest of the day passed in small, intentional actions. I gathered laundry, sorted it carefully, washed the few dishes, checked the mail, though I wasn't expecting anything. And then, late in the afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in over 2 years. I opened the sewing basket. The lid protested. Inside, buttons, threads, fabric remnants, pins dulled with age. I pulled out a piece of soft green cotton I'd bought impulsively 3 years ago, planning to make Emma a spring blouse I never started. My fingers moved slower now, but the muscle memory returned. I didn't need to complete anything, just begin, just remind my hands they still knew how to create, not just maintain. Outside, the sky turned that gentle lavender it gets just before dusk, and still the phone didn't ring. It was Emma who first asked, do you think Mom even remembers who you are anymore? We were sitting in the living room, a teapot between us, afternoon light filtering through the lace curtains. She hadn't meant it as an attack, just a question, a genuine one, but it struck like a bell. I stirred my tea, not because it needed it, but because my hands needed occupation. I think she remembers the version of me she decided to preserve, I said. Emma tilted her head. What does that mean? It means, I began slowly, she remembers the woman who packed her lunches and signed her permission slips, the one who kept her clothes clean and her room tidy. She remembers me through function, through tasks, through routine, but not through joy, not through the things I loved before I became mother full time. Emma leaned forward, chin resting on her hand. So what did you love? The question was simple, but I hadn't answered it in decades. I love dancing, I said after a pause. Swing dancing mostly. I was in a club for 2 years before I met your grandfather, and I loved old blues records and lemon tarts and swimming at the lake on the hottest days of August. I stopped, surprised at the sudden tightness in my chest. And I loved Sunday mornings when the house was quiet and I'd sit by the window with a novel and nobody needed anything from me. Emma smiled softly. I never knew that. Of course you didn't. Nobody ever asked. She looked like she was about to speak, but then her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, winced, and turned it face down without answering. Your mother. She nodded. She's been persistent. Keeps asking where I am if I've talked to you, like she suddenly cares again. She doesn't like when things move without her permission. The control freak. She doesn't think she is, I said. That's the problem. She thinks she's protecting people. She thinks she's shielding the family from embarrassment, from chaos, from, God forbid, discomfort. Emma raised an eyebrow. By telling her own mother to wait until everyone else had eaten? I shrugged. That's the kind of comfort she believes in. Hierarchy, performance. She wants her life to look polished on the outside, no matter what rot grows underneath. Emma shook her head. I don't want to become that. You won't, I said, reaching for her hand. You ask questions, you show up. She squeezed my fingers gently. That afternoon we took a walk just around the neighborhood. The air smelled like wet leaves and wood smoke. Emma carried a paper bag of cookies she'd picked up on the way, and we shared them as we walked. Do you ever regret it? She asked suddenly. Everything you gave up? I thought for a long while. The sidewalk cracked beneath our feet. A robin called from a telephone wire overhead. I regret thinking it would be repaid, I said. Emma didn't answer right away. Then she said, That's fair. When she dropped me off later, she hugged me tighter than usual. I watched her car disappear down the street, then went back inside and locked the door. Not from fear, but from choice. I liked knowing who I was letting in. That night, I sat by the radio and found a station that still played blues, specifically B.B. King. I closed my eyes and remembered the smell of polished floors, the weight of someone's hand on my waist, the thrill of moving in step with a rhythm larger than both of us. I didn't dance, not really, just swayed in place, but it was enough. The next morning, Margaret came to the cottage. I saw her through the window, standing rigid on the porch, holding something in her arms. I didn't move. I let her knock twice. Then I opened the door. Hello, Mother, she said. Her voice was too bright, too brittle. I nodded. Margaret, she held out a foil-covered dish. I brought your casserole dish back and some beef from, well, what was left. I looked at it and didn't reach for it. I have food, I said. Her smile faltered. I just thought, why are you really here? She bristled. Is it so strange for me to visit? Yes, I said plainly. She looked past me into the cottage. Emma's been avoiding me. She's been here. A pause. Margaret took a breath. Mother, I know things have been strained, but you have to understand there were guests, expectations. I didn't mean to be disrespectful. You just didn't care if you were. That's not fair. No, I said. It's not, but it's true. We stood there for several seconds, the air between us thick with things that had never been said. She held out the dish again. I didn't move. I made a roast, I said quietly. Margaret blinked. What? I made a roast the night I left. I sat in my own kitchen at my own table and I ate it while it was still warm. She looked confused, like she couldn't decide if I was angry or proud. I don't need your leftovers, I said gently. Then I closed the door. I didn't lock the door after Margaret left. I didn't need to. Some boundaries are stronger than deadbolts. I stood in the hallway a moment, holding on to the quiet. My hands didn't shake. My breath didn't catch. The old fear, the one that whispers you're being ungrateful or she meant well, was gone. It had withered sometime between the front door and the first bite of that roast I ate alone. And like anything did, it no longer held power. Later, I wrapped the dish she brought in a kitchen towel and walked it down the street to the church donation kitchen. They accept food quietly there. No questions, no paperwork, just kind souls ensuring nothing goes to waste. I placed the beef inside, left the dish, and walked home without looking back. By the time I returned, the kettle was still warm. That's when I knew what I had to do next. For years, I'd let Margaret handle things, bills, online accounts, renewals. It started small, a reminder to pay the electric bill, a suggestion to combine our phone plans. Then came the bank accounts. She convinced me to make her an authorized user on one in case something happens. It took a season, then another. Then the automatic payments began. School fees for the children, a portion of groceries, even a monthly household contribution that I never actually saw itemized. I didn't argue. I told myself I was being helpful, that families support each other, that she'd done so much for me by letting me live with them. Now all I could think was how skillfully she'd built the cage. Not out of cruelty, no, just entitlement. Quiet, subtle, and constant. I opened the drawer where I'd kept my records before moving in with Margaret. My name was still on all the accounts. The bank had updated their website since I'd last handled things, but the core remained the same. I called the branch directly. Yes, Mrs. Patterson, the young woman said after confirming my identity. You're still the primary holder on the savings and the joint checking. How can I help? I'd like to make some changes, I said, but I'd rather do them in person. Of course. Do you need any accommodations? We have assisted services if I can walk. Thank you. She hesitated. We're open until 6. I'll be there in an hour. I hung up and changed into slacks and a burgundy sweater. Something sturdy, something mine. I pinned my silver brooch into place, the one Claire always said made me look distinguished. Then I picked up my leather handbag, slipped my notepad inside, and walked to the corner to catch the bus. It felt good to wait at the stop. Normal, grounded, nobody chauffeuring me around like cargo. Nobody calling to ask where I was going. Just me out in the world, doing something for myself. At the bank, the same young woman who'd answered the phone greeted me at the counter. Her name tag read Sarah. She smiled politely, but looked slightly nervous, like I might start weeping or complaining at any moment. That's what they expect from women my age, tears or confusion. I gave her neither. I'd like to remove an authorized user from 2 accounts, I said, laying my ID flat on the counter. She blinked. Yes, of course. If you'll step into one of our offices, I'll get the forms. 10 minutes later, I sat at a polished desk signing papers with steady hands. Would you also like to revoke online access permissions? She asked. Yes, and automatic transfers. All of them. She paused, eyes flicking to the screen. There's a recurring transfer of $380 every month to a school tuition account. I know, I said. Cancel it. Another pause. There are also smaller ones, subscriptions, home services, some grocery delivery charges. Do you recognize these? No. Cancel everything. She nodded and began typing. You'll receive confirmation emails later today. I handed her a new email address I'd created that morning. Send them here. Her fingers hesitated again. Mrs. Patterson, if I may, this is a significant change. Would you like us to flag the account in case someone tries to reestablish access without your consent? I looked at her squarely. Yes, flag it. When it was done, she stood and walked me to the door. Anything else I can do for you today? I smiled. You've already done more than you know. Outside, the wind had picked up. I pulled my sweater close, but I wasn't cold. Not really. My body was humming. Not from adrenaline, but from certainty. For the first time in a long time, I knew exactly whose name was on what. And that was only the beginning. The attorney's office smelled like furniture polish and old paper. I'd been there once before, years ago, when David and I drew up our wills after his first surgery scare. The building was the same, narrow hallways, worn carpet, but the receptionist was new, and the chairs in the waiting area were now leather instead of fabric. The kind of change nobody mentions, but you feel all the same. Mrs. Patterson, the receptionist smiled. You're here to see Mr. Chin? I nodded. He's expecting me. She led me down a short corridor and into a small office with tall windows. The man behind the desk stood when I entered, younger than I remembered, but his handshake was still firm. Rose, he said, motioning to the chair across from him. It's been a while. Yes, too long. He sat and folded his hands. What brings you in? I didn't hesitate. I'd like to revise my will and I want to set up a trust for my granddaughter. He blinked once. All right. There was no judgment in his voice, just calm professionalism, which was exactly what I needed. You remember Claire? Of course. She's gone now. Been gone a while. I'm sorry. I nodded once. She left a daughter, Emma. I want to ensure that whatever I have left goes to her, not to my other daughter. He didn't flinch. We can do that. I also want to protect those assets while I'm still alive, I added. Emma's young, but I trust her more than anyone else. I don't want Margaret or anyone else having access to anything in my name. Mr. Chin opened a legal pad and began taking notes. We can create a living trust. You'll retain control as trustee, but designate Emma as the beneficiary. That way, when the time comes, she'll inherit without going through probate. Good. I'd also recommend revoking any financial power of attorney that currently names Margaret. Already done, I said. The bank's been notified her access is gone. He glanced up, lips twitching into something between a smile and a nod of approval. I want the trust to include the cottage, I continued. All the accounts I still hold, any investments, everything. That's doable. We'll draw up a schedule of assets and transfer ownership into the trust entity. You'll still live in the home, use the funds, but legally the trust owns it. Perfect. He looked at me for a moment. Pen paused above the paper. May I ask what prompted this change, Rose? I took a breath. She told me to wait until everyone else was served. His brow furrowed, then smoothed again. He didn't need the details. The sentence was enough. I see. She's been managing things for years. Not badly, but not kindly either. I let it happen. I thought I was being helpful, but lately I've started remembering that I'm still a person, not a duty, not a wallet with a cardigan. He made a few more notes. I don't want this to be revenge, I added. I just want to be clear about where I stand. I want Emma to have what I built, not what someone else siphoned off. She'll have it. The appointment took another hour. By the time we finished reviewing forms and outlining contingencies, I felt steadier than I had in months. As he slid the draft papers into a folder, Mr. Chin looked at me with quiet respect. Most people wait too long, he said, until they've already been drained. I waited long enough. He stood to walk me out. When everything's finalized, I'll call you, but you'll need to come in again for signatures. I'll be here. Outside, the sky had turned slate gray and the air smelled like rain. I didn't rush. Walked past the pharmacy, past the florist, past the tiny park with the weathered gazebo. I sat on a bench under the trees and just breathed for a while. There's something strange about reclaiming control after giving it away for so long. It doesn't feel triumphant. It feels quiet, like adjusting your posture after years of leaning the wrong way. My phone buzzed. A message from Emma. "Everything okay, Grandma?" I typed back, "It's starting to be." Then I slipped the phone into my pocket and listened to the wind in the leaves. The papers were ready within a week. I returned to Mr. Chen's office on a Thursday morning. The sky was clear for once, sunlight pooling like honey on the sidewalks, but the wind still had teeth. I wore my wool coat, the one Claire bought me the year she got her master's degree. She said it made me look like someone who doesn't ask for permission. I folded it neatly over the back of the chair in Mr. Chen's office as he laid out the documents across the desk. "Here's the will revision," he began, tapping each page gently. "Here's the trust agreement. Emma is named as sole beneficiary. You're the trustee. The cottage, accounts, and investment funds are listed in the Schedule A attachment. And here he paused, is the formal revocation of financial power of attorney." I looked at the thick envelope marked Margaret Patterson. It was already addressed and stamped. "She'll receive a copy," he confirmed, "along with the cease letter. She'll have no legal standing to act on your behalf moving forward." I took the pen. My hands didn't shake. I signed every page slowly, deliberately, watching the ink curve behind me like a trail I could finally see forming in real time. When we finished, Mr. Chen gathered everything and slipped the signed documents into a large binder. "That's it," he said. "You're no longer operating under assumption or habit. Everything's legally yours again." I nodded. "Good." "There's one more thing," he said, opening a small drawer. "Do you want to include a medical directive? Someone to speak for you if you can't?" I didn't hesitate. "Emma." "She's under 30, he warned gently. "That's fine by law, but emotionally, she's the only one who still asks what I want." He nodded and slid the form across the table. We finished in under 20 minutes. When I stood to leave, Mr. Chen offered me the binder. "Keep this somewhere safe and let Emma know where it is." "I will." And Rose, I turned. "You're not just reclaiming things, you're protecting them. There's a difference." I nodded. "That's exactly what I'm doing." I took the long way home. I passed Margaret's neighborhood and didn't turn in. I passed the school where Emma once performed in the 5th grade talent show. I passed the hardware store where David used to buy screws he didn't need just to chat with the owner. When I reached my cottage, I felt it in a new way, not as a burden, not as a museum, but as shelter, a stronghold, mine. I placed the binder in the drawer with the emergency flashlight and the spare checkbook. Then I sat at the kitchen table and wrote Emma a letter. Not dramatic, not emotional, just instructions. Where the binder was, who to call, what to do if and when. When I finished, I tucked the letter into an envelope and wrote her name in block letters across the front. Then I placed it under the old tea tin, the one she always lifts when she visits, as if I might have left something sweet inside. I stood by the window for a while, sipping tea, watching the late autumn light shift across the yard. The phone rang once, then again, I let it go. 5 minutes later, a text came through. "Margaret, we need to discuss this. It's urgent." I deleted it without reading further. Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the rooftops, I pulled out my journal and started making lists. Not lists of chores, lists of things I wanted. A new pair of walking boots, a small herb garden for spring, a trip, just a weekend somewhere with water. Not big things, not fancy things, just mine. That night, for the first time in years, I locked the door from the inside, not out of fear, but as a quiet declaration. I was home. Margaret didn't knock this time. She rang the bell once, then again, sharper, longer. I waited, finishing my tea. When I opened the door, she stood stiffly on the porch, arms crossed, face tight. "We need to discuss this," she said. "About..." Her eyes narrowed. "Don't play ignorant, Mother. You've revoked everything. I got the letter from the attorney, the trust, the will. You cut me out entirely." I stepped back and opened the door wider. "Then you already have your answer." She brushed past me into the living room, uninvited. She always walked like the cottage owed her its walls. "Why now?" she asked, spinning to face me. "Why, after all this time? You lived under my roof for over a year and suddenly I'm the villain?" I sat in my chair by the window, calm. "I don't live under your roof anymore." "You stayed there for free," she snapped. "We took care of you." "No," I said. "I cooked, I cleaned, and picked up your children from school. I paid for half your utilities. That was an arrangement, and I don't do arrangements that erase me." Margaret blinked. For a second, her mouth moved but made no sound. She hadn't expected clarity. She'd come prepared for guilt. "You're being dramatic," she said finally. "No, I'm being precise." She started pacing. "You're going to leave everything to Emma. She's 22. She doesn't know anything about finances." "She'll learn." I should have been part of that conversation. "You had years," I interrupted. "Years to treat me like a person, not a burden." "You didn't." Margaret stopped pacing. "I didn't mean to hurt you. You just didn't care if you did." She flinched, but I held her gaze. "All these years," I said quietly. "You thought I wouldn't notice. You told me when to speak, when to sit, when to eat. You dressed it up as concern, but it was always control." She crossed her arms again, defensive now. "I was trying to keep things manageable." "For who?" Her silence told me everything. After a while, she sat down across from me, her voice softening. "You could have said something sooner." "I did. You didn't hear it, or maybe you did and ignored it." Her jaw tightened again. "You made me out to be some heartless monster." "I didn't make you anything. I just stopped lying about how it felt." She exhaled hard and rubbed her forehead. "So that's it? You're just done with me?" I looked at her. My daughter, a woman I had fed and clothed and protected, and I felt no hatred, just exhaustion. "No," I said gently. "I'm not done with you. But I'm done living under your conditions." She didn't speak after that. We sat in silence for a long time, the afternoon sun painting sharp lines across the floor. Finally, she stood. "Do you want me to leave?" I nodded. "I do." Margaret looked like she might say more, but then she turned, walked to the door, and let herself out. The door shut quietly behind her. I didn't cry. I didn't feel victorious. I felt space, the kind that used to belong to me, the kind I'd forgotten how to breathe in. Later that evening, Emma called. "How are you?" she asked. "Better," I said. "Clearer." She paused. "She came by, didn't she?" "Yes." Did it help? I thought for a moment. It helped me remember that boundaries aren't cruel. They're necessary. Emma didn't say anything, but I could hear the warmth in her breath. "Good," she whispered. "That's good. We didn't talk long. We didn't need to. Sometimes it's not about what you say. It's about finally being heard." The next few days came with noise, not the kind you hear, but the kind that fills your phone. Missed calls, voicemails with polite urgency, texts that started with "Mother, I think we should talk," and ended with "This has gone too far." Some from Margaret, a few from Marcus, who never used to speak to me directly unless the insurance lapsed or a dish needed returning. The messages blurred together after a while, apologies wrapped in expectation, worry disguised as control, and underneath them all, a single thread. They were losing access and they didn't know how to function without it. I didn't answer. It wasn't revenge, it was space. I left my phone on the kitchen counter and spent mornings on the porch with a blanket and a book. I'd reread the same paragraph 4 times, not because I couldn't focus, but because I liked the rhythm of the words. I'd forgotten how books felt in the hand, how they changed the texture of time. Around noon each day, I'd walk. Not far, just through the neighborhood, past the hardware store, past the post office where Mrs. Chen still waved enthusiastically despite being 95 and nearly blind. Sometimes I'd pick up oranges or fresh bread. Sometimes I'd buy nothing at all just to remember what it felt like to move freely through a place without purpose. The cottage stayed warm. I baked for myself, small batches, 2 muffins, not 24, 1 pot of soup, not a cauldron. I ate at the table, not in front of a screen, not standing near the sink, and always from a real plate. That mattered to me. On the third evening, the doorbell rang. Not Margaret, not Marcus. It was James, Emma's younger cousin, Margaret's son, 17, all long limbs and nervous energy. He held a paper bag and wouldn't look me in the eye. "Mom made me bring this," he said, thrusting the bag forward. "It's some food, I think, and a card." I took it more for him than for myself. "Do you want to come in?" He hesitated, then nodded. Inside, he stood awkwardly in the hallway while I set the bag on the counter and peeked inside. Chicken in plastic containers, a slice of cake. The card was unsigned. James cleared his throat. "I think she's scared." "Of what?" "Of not being forgiven." I nodded. "And you?" He shrugged. "I'm just confused. You were always there. Now you're not. That's what happens when people stop seeing you." He looked down at his sneakers. "Emma says you're not angry, that you're tired." "I am." He nodded again. "I liked it when you lived with us," he said, "even if Mom always made it seem like you were in the way." I smiled. "Thank you." He looked around the cottage, taking in the photos, the quiet. It's different here. It smells like real." That made me laugh. "That's probably the cinnamon." He grinned. Before he left, he paused by the door. "Are we still family?" I looked at him, so young, still growing into his voice. "Always," I said, "but family and boundaries aren't enemies." He frowned. "What's that mean?" "It means you're allowed to say no to people you love." "Oh?" He stood there for a second longer, then stepped forward and hugged me, awkward and quick, but real. After he left, I sat at the table with the card. No signature, no note, just a blank interior with one printed word on the front. "Sorry." It didn't feel like enough, but I wasn't waiting for it to be. That night, I didn't turn the phone off. I just turned the volume down. The sound of my own breathing was enough. Margaret waited a full week before trying again. This time it came by mail. A pale yellow envelope, her handwriting on the front. She always had neat script, sharp and slanted, like she was still trying to impress a teacher. I opened it at the kitchen table, knife sliding easily through the fold. Inside, a card with silver trim, the kind people send for holidays or polite condolences. No emotion, just elegance. The message inside was short. "Let's start over. Come for dinner. Sunday. Just family, just us. Love, Margaret." I read it twice. Then I placed it back in the envelope and set it aside. I didn't need time to think. I already knew the answer. When Sunday came, I didn't go. I didn't call. I didn't explain. I simply made my own dinner, roasted vegetables, a piece of salmon, rice with fresh herbs, and I ate it by the window as the sky went soft and gold. Around 7, the phone rang. "Margaret." I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again and again. Finally, I picked up. Her voice was clipped, too steady. "You got the card?" "Yes." "We waited for you." "I know. I made the salmon, your recipe." I stirred my tea. "That's nice." She exhaled sharply. "Are you punishing me?" "No," I said. "I'm declining." She didn't understand. I could hear it in the silence. "It's just dinner, Mother." "It's never just dinner with you." A pause. "I'm trying to make things right." "No," I said. "You're trying to reset the board back to how it was. Back to what was comfortable for you, but I'm not playing anymore." Her voice cracked just slightly. "Emma says you've changed." "She's right. I don't know what you want from me." "Nothing," I said. "That's the point." Silence stretched long between us. Then, in a smaller voice, she said, "I miss you." "I believe you." More silence. "But I won't go back," I added. "I won't sit at a table where I'm asked to earn my place. I won't trade my presence for permission." Her voice hardened. "You think you're better than us now?" "No," I said. "I think I finally remember I matter." She didn't respond, and I didn't fill the gap. Eventually, she said, "I don't know what else to do." You don't have to do anything, I said gently. Just stop expecting me to return to who I was when I forgot myself. She ended the call, not with anger, just with a kind of finality. A door she didn't know how to open and wasn't ready to walk through. I sat there a long time, listening to the quiet. Not lonely, not triumphant, just still. Later, I opened the drawer, took out the yellow envelope, and tore it in half. Then again, and once more. The scraps fluttered into the trash like dried petals. I went to bed early. No dreams, just rest. And in the morning, I woke without dread. I signed the lease on a Tuesday. It was a small apartment, 2 rooms and a kitchen on the second floor of a quiet building near the river. Nothing grand, nothing polished, but the windows faced east, and the light poured in like warm honey each morning. That mattered more than granite countertops ever could. The landlord, Mr. Rodriguez, was kind. He helped carry the boxes up the narrow stairs and showed me where the circuit breaker was, just in case. When I asked about painting the kitchen cabinets, he shrugged and said, "As long as you don't pick neon pink, I trust you." I chose cream white. Emma helped me settle in. We made a day of it, unpacking slowly, drinking iced tea from mismatched glasses, and laughing when we found things I didn't even remember owning. She hung a small frame print above the sink, a lavender field, soft and faded. "It looks like you," she said. "Rooted, but still growing." I smiled. That's nicer than being called sturdy. We spent the afternoon arranging the bookshelves. Claire's letters went into a wooden box that now lived on the side table, close enough to touch. By evening, Emma had to leave. Before she did, she placed a plant, a trailing ivy, on the windowsill. "Every woman needs a plant," she said. "It's proof you can still nurture something." After she left, I sat on the couch and listened to the new quiet. Different from the silence in Margaret's house, this one didn't press. It welcomed. It asked nothing. I made a simple dinner, sautéed greens, a soft-boiled egg, toast. I ate it slowly, watching the shadows climb the opposite wall. No one asked why there weren't more sides. No one criticized the runniness of the yolk. The next morning, I met my neighbor. Her name was Dorothy, 81, and she walked with a cane that had butterfly stickers all over the handle. "You're the new one," she said, eyeing me like a shopkeeper does fresh inventory. "I suppose I am." She nodded toward my door. "Don't put out trash before 6. They fine us. And the lady in 2C feeds the pigeons, but don't tell management. I like her too much to see her evicted." I smiled. "Thanks for the warning." She leaned in, lowering her voice. "You divorced?" "No, widowed." She tilted her head. "Then what brings you here?" I didn't hesitate. I remembered I'm allowed to live on my own terms. Her lips twitched. "Well, it's about damn time." We stood in the hallway, talking for 20 minutes about arthritis, old movies, and which grocery store had the best produce. She reminded me a little of myself, sharp when she needed to be, but kind underneath. A woman who'd weathered more than she let on. That afternoon, I rearranged the silverware drawer, not because it was wrong, just because I could. I placed spoons in the front, forks at the back. It made no logical sense, but it pleased me. Later, I took a walk around the block, just once, enough to feel the air on my skin, enough to feel like part of the day. And when I returned, there were no expectations waiting for me. Just the warm hum of the heater, just the lavender field above the sink, just me in my space with no one asking what I was doing there. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was visiting my own life. The envelope was ivory colored and addressed in white looping cursive. I nearly tossed it with the flyers and coupon mailers, only the return address stopped me. Helen Morrison. I hadn't heard that name in over 30 years. We'd lived 3 houses apart when the girls were little. She had twin daughters, both wild and fast, always tracking sand through her kitchen. We used to sit on her front steps drinking coffee while the kids turned the yard into a battlefield. She smoked Virginia Slims and wore her hair in a ponytail that swung when she laughed. She moved after her husband got promoted to Oregon. We promised to write. We didn't. I opened the letter at the kitchen table, already brewing tea. The paper was thick, the ink slightly faded. "Rosie," it began, "I saw your name in the church newsletter. They said you'd spoken at a memorial fundraiser for Claire last spring. I couldn't believe it. I'm sorry it took me so long to find the right words, but when I saw your name again, I knew I had to reach out." She remembered Claire, remembered her laugh, remembered her drawing hopscotch squares on the sidewalk with chalk and insisting they were architectural plans. She wrote about her daughter, one now a nurse, the other working in marketing. She had grandchildren, a cat, a new knee. She said she was slower now, but not finished yet. Then, near the end, "I still remember the woman who danced barefoot in the rain on your 41st birthday. The one who said, 'If the world's already wet, you might as well move with it.' I hope you've kept dancing, and if not, well, it's never too late." I put the letter down and felt something soft and old press into my chest. Not sadness, not quite nostalgia, just recognition. I had forgotten that woman. She wasn't a fantasy or a version of myself from a dream. She was real. She lived here once, in this body with these hands, and I'd buried her under years of, "Is dinner ready? And can you pick up the kids? And you're just being sensitive, mother." I stood up, crossed the kitchen, and opened the drawer where I kept old dish towels. At the very back, folded tight, was a CD Emma had burned for me years ago. Grandma's Blues, written in silver marker. I didn't even know if it would play anymore, but I pulled out the old stereo, dusted it off, and tried. It crackled, then caught. Etta James's voice filled the room, low and deep like honey turning in the spoon. I stood by the window, arms crossed, just listening. Then I let myself sway. Just a little. The floor creaked beneath me, and my knees didn't love the movement, but I moved anyway. In my socks, with no one watching, with no performance. It wasn't dancing, not really, but maybe it was close enough. I wrote Helen back that same afternoon. I told her, "Thank you for remembering, for seeing, for naming the version of me I had forgotten." I told her about Claire, about Emma, about the roast I carried out the front door like an offering to my old self. I didn't mention Margaret. I didn't need to. I ended the letter with a line she'd once said to me after I'd spilled wine on a new blouse and nearly cried over it. "You're allowed to be messy. Just don't pretend it's someone else's mess." I'd never forgotten that, even if I forgot everything else. When I walked to the mailbox, the wind picked up, cold and fast but not punishing. The lavender field print fluttered slightly when I came back inside. I touched the frame lightly. "I remember you," I said quietly, and I did. Emma came over on a Friday. No warning, no text, just a soft knock in her face behind the frosted glass. "I brought mushrooms," she said, holding up a brown paper bag, "and those little shallots you like." "I was just about to make risotto," I said. "Perfect," she smiled. "I'll stir." We didn't rush. The kitchen wasn't large, but we moved around each other easily. I showed her where I kept the wooden spoons. Still smooth, still familiar. She chopped shallots with practiced hands, eyes watering from the sharpness. "I forgot how potent these are," she muttered. "That's how you know they're honest," I said. She laughed and wiped her eyes. I cleaned the mushrooms gently with a towel. No soaking, no shortcuts. She watched for a moment, then mimicked me. "Mom always scrubs them under the faucet." "Your mother never had patience for mushrooms." Emma didn't argue. She just nodded. We worked in comfortable quiet, broken only by the bubbling of the stock. The smell filled the apartment, earthy, savory, warm. She found bowls in the cabinet without asking, set the table without fuss. When we sat down, neither of us reached for our phones. She tasted the risotto and closed her eyes. "God, Grandma, this is perfect." I smiled. "It's just rice." "No," she said. "It's yours. That's the difference." We ate slowly. She twirled each forkful carefully, letting it cool before each bite. When the bowls were nearly empty, she looked up. Do you think I'll end up like her? There was no bitterness in her voice, just the question. Bare, genuine. No, I said. You already asked the question she never could. Emma played with her spoon. She's trying again, sending messages, telling me she wants to talk. Do you want to? She thought for a long moment, then shook her head. Not right now. I just don't trust what she wants. You don't owe her more than you have to give. She looked relieved, not because I gave her permission, but because I said it aloud. After dinner, we washed dishes together. She dried, I rinsed. I like it here, she said. It feels honest. That's the second time you've used that word tonight. Yeah, she said, smiling. I think I'm craving it. When we finished, she didn't rush to leave. She wandered into the living room, sat on the floor with her back against the couch. I joined her. I used to think you were just quiet, she said. But now I think you were just careful. I nodded. I had to be. Why? Because when you grow up in a world that doesn't ask what you think, you learn to watch first, to measure. And now I'm learning to answer before I'm asked. Emma leaned her head back, resting it against the cushions. I want to be like that, she said. You already are. We sat a long while without talking. Eventually she stood, pulled on her coat and kissed my cheek. Thank you, she whispered, for all of this. Come back next week, I said. We'll try pasta. Deal. After she left, I cleaned the counter, wiped the stove, folded the dish towel over the sink. The apartment smelled like garlic and herbs, like effort and ease. I poured myself a small glass of wine and sat by the window. Outside, a streetlight flickered. The air looked like velvet, thick, quiet, soft. I didn't think of Margaret. I thought of Emma. I thought of risotto and salt, and how some things, once tended properly, don't need saving, just space and time. There's a moment just before dawn when the world holds its breath. The sky isn't light yet, but it isn't dark either. The shadows soften. Even the wind seems to pause. That's when I like to walk now, just a short loop, down to the corner, past the bakery that opens too early, then back again. The air is crisp, and the sidewalks are still damp from the night. Sometimes I see Dorothy from down the hall. She walks slower these days, but she still waves. The morning I turned 80, I found a small note taped to my door. Happy birthday, Rose. You remind me who I want to become. No name, but I knew it was Emma. I didn't need flowers or fanfare. That note was enough. I made myself French toast that morning. Just 2 slices with a little butter, a drizzle of maple syrup, and half a pear. I ate them slowly at the table, sunlight warming the floor by my feet. Later, I opened the drawer where the binder lived. I hadn't touched it in weeks, but I pulled it out, placed it on the table, and added one last letter. Short, clear, folded once. It read, Emma, what I have is yours. Not because of blood, but because of kindness. You never tried to manage me. You just met me where I stood. That's love. That's legacy. Don't let anyone teach you otherwise. I placed it behind the wheel and closed the binder. That afternoon, I sat on the small balcony and watched the light move across the river. Nothing extraordinary happened. A jogger passed. A child on a scooter wobbled by, his mother calling after him. The world, unbothered by my peace, kept going. I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for apologies, not for understanding, not for the version of motherhood I never got to grow into. I had enough. I had Emma. I had mornings and music and the scent of risotto simmering just for me. Sometimes healing isn't a wave. It's a quiet return to yourself. And if you've been reading this, if you've ever felt small in a house you helped build or quiet in a life you once led loudly, let this be your permission. You don't need anyone's blessing to come back to yourself. You just need to begin. So begin now. And if this story found you, share it. Your worth was never up for debate.